this presentation. You can actually save it to your phone on the presentation well, and you have it as a reference tool. Does everybody scan that? I'm going to jump over to the... Go ahead.
I let him get Charles' phone for him.
So next July, this coming July, we have Nathan coming back, and we're going to do garden pollinators. We're going to do a little bit of a change up on that. He has a new presentation,
aquatic entomology,
which is going to be really good. So we'll redo the flyer for next July, for this July, next month, to advertise that. That's a brand new presentation. Soon to be very interesting. I know it's June and July, school's out, vacations are on, a lot of things are going on. Bear with us, there'll probably be more people coming in as we go through the presentation. Everybody got this?
I got it.
Marty?
I got it for him.
Okay, come on up, Nathan. Nathan's no stranger to us, and I had him back because last year when we did the presentations, we had such an overwhelming response. There were side bets on how old Nathan was, so we dispelled it very quickly. No, he's not 21, 22, he is older than that. So without that, I'd like to welcome you back again, Nathan. And this, you should be good to go here.
Okay, good.
With this, forward and reverse.
All right,
okay?
Excellent. All right, everybody, thank you for welcoming me again. I had a lot of fun when I was here last. You guys know I have a bit of a sense of humor, so I kind of throw that in there. But for just housekeeping, I am gonna not be here at the computer. I will be either at the screen here so that I can address you guys closer, or I'll be over here so that I can address those of you who are on this side. On this side, probably a bit more. So with that being said, today we are talking about bees. And bees are actually one of my favorite insects, and it's just because of a couple things: the biodiversity, the amount of different kinds of bees that there are out there, and just some of their unique behaviors and some interesting quirks. And so first I'd like to talk about what exactly is a bee. And so as you know, bees are related to ants and wasps, as well as some other insects. The main things to keep in mind are elbowed antennas, very large eyes. They typically have 3 eyes in the center of their head that are really quite hard to see due to all the hair, but those are called simple eyes, and they're just there to see, to distinguish light and dark. Their large, complex eyes are there to focus in on specific images. And of course, you know, insects have a face set of different parts of the eye so that it all forms one image. You've seen the scary movies where the insect is chasing someone. It looks like there's 9 of that person. Well, that's not really accurate, but it is a mosaic of image that's formed together. And then, of course, so many of them are either social or they are solitary. The social ones are called eusocial or truly social, and that means they have a caste system. So they have a leader, they have, you know, workers that do specific jobs, and that's all divvied up based on age and, you know, physical ability and such. And of course, you know, most of them are female. The males are typically just there to mate with the queen, and then they move forward from there. For the solitary ones, it's a little bit different. The males and the females kind of go and do their own thing. There's no workers, so the queen has to basically do everything, raise the eggs and feed the larvae as well. And then if you look at ants and wasps, you'll see a very prominent waist, especially in the ants. While bees do have that waist, the waist is very short and very difficult to see. Once again, they are mostly covered in hair, so it's hard to see some of the features. They also have a stinger venom sac. Common misconception is that insects in Hymenoptera can only sting once before they die. That only applies to honeybees. All of the others can sting repeatedly. There are some sources of information where I've read that once a hive descends on someone of like wasps or bumblebees, bumblebees usually don't sting, but wasps or any of the other kinds of insects, that they'll sting repeatedly in the same spot. Some of them won't bite with their very strong jaws because they do use those jaws to attack other insects or to just chop up plant material to use for their nests as well, and pollen as well. They'll mix that together and use that as food. And so they have very strong jaws, including honeybees, and so they're able to use those as weapons, and they're very effective. And then most importantly, and this is good for identification, is the membranous wings. Membranous just means that they're not completely solid. So look at butterfly wings where you just see color. These are very easy to see. You can see all of those veins, and so it's really easy to see all of those. And if you look here at the way the wing structure is, there is a hoverfly that actually has an extra vein that comes down. And so people confuse hoverflies with bees. Well, hoverflies will have an extra vein. Now you can't, some people don't want to get close enough to see that. But the other thing to keep in mind is that hymenopterans have 4 wings, while that would be ants, bees, and wasps only have 4 wings, while flies only have 2 wings. Hence the name Diptera, di means 2. The other interesting thing with the wings here is you can see that they have these hooks. And so they'll have hooks on the top part of the wing, and then on the underside of the wing they have receivers, which are like an area where those hooks can hook to the wing and set in. It acts like Velcro, and so they hook together. The reason for this is so that the wings aren't kind of just all over the place. They're acting as one unit on both sides, and so that makes hymenopterans extremely good flyers. That's why you don't see them smashing into things the way beetles do. They're very efficient flyers, and this is good because they can go far to pollinate. All right, so some impacts of some of the bees we'll talk about today. Keep in mind that we're talking about pollinators here, and of course you guys know what pollinators are, but that is something that impacts our society because we have to have food to live. And so the more pollinators there are, and the more biodiversity, and the greater increase of pollination, not only does it produce more of the product, but produces a higher quality. So if you guys have ever had a really good strawberry or really juicy, firm watermelon, that is a result of pollination, and it's a result of repeated pollination of the same group of plants. And so something I actually talked about pollination with some younger kids yesterday. And so one of the things I mentioned was that cross-pollination is possible between related species. So you can have a lemon tree get cross-pollinated with like a lime or an orange because they're in the same family. But you can't have like a rose cross-pollinated with pecans or something like that. It has to be in the same group. And that's something that's great because then you can have kind of rare fruits and vegetables and stuff. And then, of course, you know, there are people who do both recreational and professional beekeeping. There are some government programs for people who have a certain acreage of land, and then they have bees. I don't know too much about this as I'm not really into the whole land development thing, but I do know that beekeeping is something where people can receive funds from the government to help them with managing their land, and it makes things a little bit easier for people who might have bees, and then they also have livestock and plants and other things where they need to hire people or get supplies to be able to do that. So the government assistance is there to provide for that. And then, of course, products. This is probably the most important piece here, is that we have products that we use in addition to crops, such as honey. A lot of your cosmetics, lotions, lip gloss, makeup, those type of things use the pollen and the nectar from and honey from the and the wax, of course, too. The wax can also be eaten, so that is a good source of food. And another thing to mention, I didn't put it on here, but honey is very healthy. Yes.
This may be a stupid question, I'm sorry. But when cross-pollination happens, does it affect just the seed that you plant from that pollination, or does it affect, like if you had 2 different kinds of squash plants, would it affect the squash you harvest?
So no, so that's a good question. So the squash plant, so if you had 2 different kinds of squash, those 2 kinds of squash will stay the same way they are. What will change is if you have, let's say, yellow squash, and that gets cross-pollinated with the green squash, the seeds that are produced will be what creates something new. It's kind of like, think about like humans, parents. So when we technically cross-pollinate with each other, we don't change, but the offspring do, and then that continues down the line as well. So that is how that works. Also, I'm always good to answer questions during the slide. I don't like to wait till the end because I'm forgetful. So I know that it's hard sometimes, you know, there's so much information and new things and new ideas flowing. And so feel free to raise your hand or ask questions, you know, during any slide. I'm always happy to answer questions. And then this thing here at the bottom, pollination cascades. So I talked about this yesterday with the kids, and I said that when we think about pollination usually from the standpoint of seed production and food, but also when pollination occurs, food is being produced for herbivores, so your mice and your rabbits and all of your other mammals and birds as well. And when they're feeding on those plants, they're then, you know, fertilizing the ground, and so the soil has increased organic matter, and so there's less likely to be erosion, and also increase of like things like trees and bushes, less erosion, not likely to have mudslides and other things, and dust storms and stuff like that. And so pollination can actually increase the success of a biome, and this can impact a lot of different things. For example, if you have a type of butterfly that pollinates, wild field, like tall grass prairies, for example, you might have rabbits and other small mammals that come there to feed, and then you might have an increased population of wolves now that their prey animal is more common. And so it's interesting to go from insect all the way up to big predator mammal, and so you can see how all of that is connected together. And so one of the things I like to talk about is bee ecology. So this really just means how are they impacting each other? How are they impacting plants, similar to what we talked about with the cascades? Are there any unique habits, or, you know, is there a way to enhance diversity in your own backyard as well? And then also one of the things we do is alternative. I see a dog out there. Alternative pollination, which is where we focus on alternatives to honeybees, because honeybees are great, but as we learn that monoculture is never good, and that goes just as much with plants as it does with animals. And so it's always good to have, once again, increased biodiversity, because it's like this. My mom always says that many hands make light work. And so if you have many hands in the wild all doing beneficial things, then you have a greater impact, rather than just one thing, you know, being involved. And so that is the case with bees as well. And the other neat thing about that is that honeybees aren't necessarily tolerant to certain conditions like drought or cold, and some of the other pollinators are. Did I see you raise your hand? Okay, I thought I did. All right. So first off with bumblebees, which are actually my favorite out of all of these bees. These are definitely the hairiest ones. So the interesting thing about these bees is they do actually produce honey, but it's a much it's a much more liquidy honey. It's not really going to help us as much because we like our thick, syrupy honey. Additionally, because bumblebee hives are much smaller than honeybee hives, they don't produce as much. And so if we were to take their honey, two things would happen. One, we'd have to dig up their nests, because their nests are usually underground and usually kind of mixed in with like mouse burrows and other things, where if we were to try and get in there, it would actually cause a lot of damage. Compared to a honeybee hive where, you know, if you are a beekeeper, you just pull the frame and you scrape the honey, and it's that simple. You're not actually damaging their brood or their livelihood. But also it's the fact that they don't produce enough honey to survive the winter, or to, if you were to take from them, they wouldn't have enough to survive through the cold season. And there's a bunch of species in the United States. We have the eastern, we have the white honeybee, which is like gold with a white stripe. There are a whole bunch of different kinds. But a lot of them have the similar patterns as to what they actually pollinate. So there's actually a really cool video about what I'm about to tell you. But the video basically talks about how during the winter, as soon as we hit March and the snow, which I wish we had snow, but you know, the snow melts, a queen bumblebee will emerge from where she was hiding in the soil. She'll defrost, and then she will start feeding on pollen, any of the plants that are just popping up. And then as soon as she has enough energy to really fly and she's dried off and everything's good, she will actually go and look for a burrow. Now sometimes that might be the burrow of a skunk or a mouse. The video in question that I watched, I believe it was a mouse, and she actually won, which I was surprised, but you know, don't underestimate insects. Small but mighty, as they say. And so she was able to chase the mouse away and take that burrow for herself, and then she began building her honey pots. You can kind of see what they look like in the picture here. They look more like pots rather than hex combs. They don't build hex combs. And so it's kind of more of a jumbled mess than what you would see where honeybees are a little bit more orderly and clean. And so they will do this. What they'll do is they'll start building first, and then they will find the males and they'll mate, and then they'll produce the workers. And the workers she'll retire at that point, and then the workers will continue. It's just like humans. When we retire, our kids are the ones who, carry the torch forward. That is the same way it works. Now, they can sting repeatedly, as I said before, and that's part of how they're able to combat their enemies so readily, is that they can sting repeatedly, and after a while, the enemies are tired of taking that sting. The biggest threat to bumblebees are bears. Now, this is the reason why a lot of times insects are afraid of the color black. And so when beekeepers are out working, they wear white because white is a color that's not really attractive to insects. It's pretty neutral, not literally, but neutral. And black reminds a lot of bees of black bears, which is black bears are a major pest for one of the major pests for bees in general, including bumblebees and honeybees, because they like the sweet honeycomb and the honey, and they will tear up and destroy bumblebee nests. And they're actually really good at finding where they're located. As I said, they are underground, so a human risk of being stung is very low unless you were to grab a bee out of the air or something like that. Yes?
Now, how long do they stay in that one location?
They'll stay there until the next year, and then the next year a new queen will go and find a new hive. So they don't really move around a lot. In fact, most bees do not move around because it would take too much energy to try and move the whole hive. And in moving, you actually risk destruction by predators. So it's better to stay hidden in your safe spot and not risk, exposure to the elements or to predators. So they will stay right where they are until.
So one hive stays there, and another one.
Yes. So similar to ants, when you see multiple ant piles in one area, it's most likely that they're related. Now, unlike ants, bees don't usually war with each other because they're not predatory, and a lot of times you'll see multiple hives in one spot pollinating, but they don't have any really competition with each other. But the predatory animals like wasps and ants will compete. But yes, when you see multiple hives in an area, it's very likely that those hives are related to each other. Not definite, but it's a high likelihood.
Will
Yes.
they help out others if this hive is being attacked? Will they come and
No.
help out?
So have any of you ever watched The Magic School Bus? Okay, so there's an episode of The Magic School Bus where they turn into bees. And in that episode, they explain, this is how bees are able to protect themselves. So they have a hive, and then it's not as much with bumblebees, but certainly with the other social bees, they usually have some sort of guard or someone that's in charge of making sure whoever's coming and going, is allowed to do so. But each hive has its own pheromone. So in the next year, once this hive has hibernated and once they're safe, the next queen, because at some point more queens will start being created, that normally happens during a hive, is at some point the fertilization runs out, non-fertilized eggs become adults. We call them winged alates, but they can either be queens or they can be drones. The drones will usually mate and then leave and die. The queens are the ones that then will leave this hive and then go and make their own hive. And so when they do that, their pheromone that they shared with this hive now changes because now they have their own pheromone, they've separated from the hive, and so that begins to change. And so it's like bee puberty is what I think of it. Yes, so that was a good question. But they will not help each other out. Bumblebees aren't aggressive, so they usually won't fight each other, but honeybees, if a honeybee that doesn't, even if it was a previous member of the hive, like a previous queen or a new queen, if they come back to the hive that they were at before, those bees will actually kill them off. And then the drones will actually be killed off as well. For bumblebees, drones will usually fly away and die somewhere else, but for honeybees, drones will be killed, usually by beheading, and then they'll just be thrown somewhere. It's pretty brutal. And then pollen is usually used as bedding in food. Pollen is a great source of protein for insects, and for us too. It's part of why honey is helpful, because they do add pollen to their honey as well, or to their nectar in this case. So bumblebee pollination, real quick, I'll talk about buzz pollination. So there's around 20,000 species of plants that are buzz pollinated. So buzz pollination is where, you can actually see it in the picture here. Some plants have a sheath where honeybees and other insects can't actually, unless they were to chew through it, access their nectar and pollen. And so the bumblebees actually have to vibrate very quickly, and because they're so large and robust, that vibration actually, you can actually, if you were to get close, you would actually feel, you could feel the sound waves from it. It's pretty impressive when there's a lot of them around. You can actually really feel as if the buzzing's kind of, taking over. But They buzz and they vibrate, and then that sheath pops open, and then they're able to access the nectar and the pollen that way. And so that's what buzz pollination is. This is something that impacts our tomato industry. So if you like tomatoes on your salad, which I do, I go to Olive Garden and I get their salad, and those red juicy tomatoes with the Italian sauce, very delicious. And I have the bumblebees to thank for that, because a lot of times with the tomato industry, they have these large greenhouses, massive, and they'll have multiple boxes there with bumblebees, and then the humans will be walking around, no protection or anything, just walking around and doing, harvesting or planting or watering or doing whatever they have to do. And the bumblebees will be doing the same as far as pollinating and whatnot, and doing whatever they have to do with the hive. And so bumblebees are very docile. There are quite a few videos on YouTube of people actually finding injured bumblebees and raising them back up to health, and then the bumblebees are friends with them and stuff like that. I tried telling my parents all this, and they think that I'm crazy for thinking animals are that smart. But I'm like, I've been in this business for a while. I've seen some stuff. So yeah, here using greenhouses. They can operate in lower light, so they might be out earlier or later than honeybees will. As I said, a greater variety of plants can be pollinated due to that buzz pollination. So things like tomatoes and locust and is it called wisteria, the big plant that hangs down? Those are some of the ones that, those bright purples and yellows, bumblebees love that. Also sunflowers, they love sunflowers. We had a sunflower farm at Prairie View, and we had a row of about 6 sunflowers, and then we had some other plants around. And I would go and walk through the row, and you would see like 3 or 4 bumblebees all gathered together. They also really like, what's that stuff called? Purple salvia. They love purple salvia. And it's the one that grows really tall with the lime green leaves, and then the salvia kind of turns into like a forked hand like this, and then you'll see a lot of bumblebees enjoying that as well. So moving to carpenter bees. Now, a lot of people do confuse carpenter bees and bumblebees. I used to do that as well until I learned that, there's some differences. Main difference being that there's typically more black. Now this here is a carpenter bee. It's not as common. We're more likely to see one of these two here. And so bumblebees will usually have a greater amount of golden yellow on their bodies. Carpenter bees traditionally have a very shiny metallic black. Sometimes it looks a little bit blue. It kind of has that color shifting effect to it. So the males will have a white face like this. The female's face will be black. It's hard to tell there, but it is in fact a female compared to the male here. The males do not sting, and they typically they'll mate with a female and then just leave. These are solitary, and so what they do is they drill a circular hole in wood, and so this can be trees, this can be buildings, whatever kind of wood that's thick enough for them to be able to drill a hive. And then they'll lay their egg there, and then the egg will hatch into the larva. They'll go and get pollen and nectar and other things and feed that. So they don't produce a nest the way social bees do. They don't have combs or anything where they're storing stuff. They're really just feeding their offspring. And then the main issue with, actually I'll get to that later. So I think that's about it for this one. What you'll usually see when you're looking down at a carpenter bee, you'll see black head, yellow thorax, or sometimes all black. And then you'll see like a shiny spot, like right in the middle, as if they've like buffed that area. And so that's one way to tell that it's a little bit different from a bumblebee. So this is on the right here what the tracks that the larvae leave behind look like. So they'll drill through wood and leave these tunnels. The interesting thing is that when they emerge, once again, they leave a circular hole. This is important because there's another wood-boring insect that is the bark beetle. Some of the bark beetles, they will drill into wood as well, but they leave a D-shaped hole. And so that's how you can tell whether you're dealing with a bee or with a beetle. Even though they start with B, one's different. And then the best way to deal with this. So this is one of those insects that is both beneficial because they pollinate, but it can be a pest if you are living in a wooden house, or if you have if you're growing like a forest or a grove of fruit trees. This can be an issue. Treating or painting the wood is a good way to deal with this as well. Once again, the males don't sting. All right. So with pollination, they also buzz pollinate, and the main point here, they like some of the same flowers that bumblebees do. The main point here is that the bumblebees, or the carpenter bees, will enter the flower until you can only see their butts, and that's how I've captured some of them. I put a plastic bag over it, and I can look at it up close. They get pretty mad when you do that, though. And you can see here up close the elbowed antenna and the large eyes there, and you can see that this one is very shiny black, so that's obviously a carpenter bee. But what they'll do is they'll rob nectar. And so instead of going into the flower, they'll come to the side and actually chew a hole in the flower and then just steal nectar. And they don't pollinate at all when they do that. What I have witnessed is some of them pollinating normally and then others doing nectar robbing. And I'm not sure what causes them to want to choose which one they want to do. It might be that they've pollinated flowers that were already pollinated and they decide to just cut their losses and literally cut their losses. And so that may be an issue there. Planting some coneflowers and butterfly bush is a great way to attract these guys. They also love sunflowers. Pretty much most of the same plants that you can plant that bumblebees enjoy as well. So leafcutter bees are one of the more unique because they are also solitary, and they're also both a pollinator and in some cases a pest, but they're not a pest in a way that would actually harm your plants or cause any damage. They're more of an aesthetic pest. So this is an important note. If you look at a leaf, if you see what looks like a human took a bite out of the leaf and it leaves the really jagged marks, that's a caterpillar. But if you see perfectly circular marks that are like very neat, that's a leafcutter bee. And the reason for this is that they're very careful in cutting exactly the right piece, and they use this to make their nests. And so they look a little bit like honeybees, but they have a few differences. First of all is that their jaws are quite a bit larger. And you can see here they have some white stripes on the abdomen as well, instead of the typical black and yellow stripes that you would see for a honeybee. So once you look up close, you can see the difference there. They love alfalfa. Alfalfa is one of their favorite plants to pollinate. And they usually don't sting unless you squish them or if you step on them or they get caught in your clothing, which shouldn't be a common occurrence. Once again, these are solitary, and so they build their nests out of those leaves. I think the next slide, that's what their nests look like. And so they use mud and saliva to glue that together. And so it's pretty interesting. As I said, the leaf cutting isn't harmful to the plant. It's mostly an aesthetic thing. So you will see leaves with the circular bites. And the interesting thing with this one is, unlike all the other bees we've talked about who use their legs to carry pollen, they comb themselves and they get the pollen to their pollen baskets. They actually have some hairs, special hairs on their abdomen, on their butts essentially, where they're able to carry from place to place.
So where would you find these?
You would just find them around, actually I'm going to talk about that next. These are some of the plants where you would most likely find them pollinating. They like azaleas a lot, roses, any kinds of ornamental shrubs, anything that's broadleaf and that's easy for them to cut into. So like live oak wouldn't work because it's got that glossy like hardness to it. But like maples or anything like that, that's a sufficient source of for their plants, for their home. So like I said, broadleaves mostly because broadleaves are typically a victim of a lot of insects because they're really easy to cut into and take material for. Hold on a second. Oh yes, so some of the plants that they do pollinate, alfalfa, blueberry, and carrots, and native wildflowers. So your tall grass prairies would be a great, and roadsides, areas like that. Not really backyards and gardens, but definitely more wild areas is where you would see leafcutter bees at. We did have a bunch of them on my campus in New Mexico because I found a tree with a lot of those circular holes cut, and I was looking for caterpillars. At the time, I didn't know there was a difference until my professor told me, oh no, those are leafcutter bee markings. So moving to one of my other favorites, which are called sweat bees, and I will explain why they're called that. So they are typically very metallic and brightly colored. Some of the most beautiful bees, in fact, if not the most beautiful bee, although there is one other that is possibly a rival for this. These bees are very docile. They're solitary. Sometimes they're called sand wasps, which I'll explain in just a moment, but they're not wasps, they are bees. That's kind of the primary color that I see them in around here. It's usually green or yellow or gold, sometimes brown. Sometimes you'll see them in black as well. And they're some of the smallest bees out there too. So that's a sweat bee in its nest there. That's the green one that I was talking about. They typically like temperate regions. The reason for this is they need soil that's loose but still firm enough to mold, because they do build a circular hole and then they hide in there, and that's where they lay their eggs, and then they feed their larvae in there. Once again, this is another bee that really likes native wildflowers, and so if you can find specific native plants that are native to your area, and that can actually vary by city and by county as well. It's very strange how that works. That's the best way to attract the last two bees that we've talked about. And so what they'll usually do is they'll find an area that's filled with wildflowers or a garden, and then they'll find a patch of bare soil. So you can actually leave patches of bare soil and keep it relatively dry. Of course it rains, but keep it relatively dry, and then the bees will actually utilize that. And there are actually bee nests on sale that are used for both the leaf cutters and for the sweat bees as well that you can buy. I'm not sure how successful they are, but I've seen them around quite a bit. So with sweat bees, they really like fruits. So if you are a person who wants to create a fruit tree grove, if you want to grow pears, apples, peaches, persimmons, anything like that, stone fruits, sweat bees will be your friend. They really enjoy that. And the great thing about that too is that pollinators that pollinate, including other insects and other animals that pollinate your fruit trees, will usually pollinate, and then they'll come back and actually, this may not be a good thing, but they'll actually feed on those fruits. And so that's one of their main sources of food. This includes beetles and, like I said, bees. A lot of these bees will also feed on fruits, and so they can actually get liquid from fruit. It doesn't help their hive, but it's still a source of energy for them, and so you can leave out overripe fruit, and you'll see that they'll feed on that as well. Sweat bees will definitely do that. You'll see them like swarm the fruit, and you'll see like 4 or 5 on one fruit if it's overripe. And so, fruit's overripe on the vine as well, and so that's how they'll get to them. Beetles will do the same thing. Sunflower and alfalfa, once again, great pollinator source. And so this is something that I read in a book called Managing Insects on Your Farm. It talks about how a lot of times with farmers, we grow our crops and then we neutralize the weeds and all of the wildland in the area to keep everything kind of sterile. Well, the suggestion is to let those things grow, as long as they're not invasive species, to let native stuff grow in the periphery of your territory or your land, because bees such as sweat bees and leafcutter bees and bumblebees and honeybees will use those areas for their homes as well as for shelter. They'll use that for food. If they're pollinating and doing other things, those are important areas for them to have access to and for us to cultivate. So hold on a second, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I think we're good. So why these bees that we've talked about, why are they such great pollinators? What exactly about them is it that makes them great pollinators? And this relates to the thing I said about alternative pollinators. Why should we use pollinators other than bees? So other than honeybees. So we know that honeybees are not too picky about what they eat. We also know that they're relatively furry and that they're pretty good at gathering pollen all over their bodies. But the great thing about bees, as I said before, they're not very picky. They have very fuzzy bodies. The pollen baskets or the abdominal hairs, this is not something you see on other insects where they have a specific tool on their body just for capturing pollen. And that's partially because that pollen is actually important for the social bees, important for their life cycle. So in order to develop queens or to have the larvae grow into adults, and the drones as well, they actually have to feed them certain mixtures. So sometimes bees will produce this jelly and they'll mix that with pollen. Sometimes they'll mix nectar and pollen together. And depending on that combination, that will actually also have a role in determining, okay, what kind of bee do you become? Do you become a queen or do you become a drone? That kind of thing. And so drones will get usually fed the lesser quality stuff. Sometimes it'll just be in the nectar, but the queens get fed the cream of the crop. So they'll get fed royal jelly and bee bread, and they'll get fed that once they become adults as well. And that keeps them able to produce the amount of eggs that they're producing. This doesn't really hold true with solitary bees because they're just feeding on nectar and pollen as normal. But once again, pollen is a great source of protein for them. It gives them the energy they need. Bees this is interesting. I believe for the social bees, like honeybees as well as bumblebees, it's been calculated that if you were to take the entire hive and calculate the distance that they would fly, the ones that are relegated to flying duty and scouting and such, that they would be able to fly from the planet Earth to the sun like 500 times or something like that, if you were to calculate the entire hive. So that is a lot of distance that they're traveling, because what bees will do is they might see a good patch here, a good patch here for them to pollinate, but they're looking for something that is sustainable, where they're like, okay, we can keep going and coming back to this spot and being able to use that as food, because food does run out, and it's something that they have to keep renewing. The long proboscis is also helpful. Bumblebees and carpenter bees have a longer proboscis than honeybees do, so that enables them to reach some plants that like hummingbirds enjoy. So some of those deep bell-shaped flowers they're able to reach where honeybees might not be able to. And then, as I said before, nectar and pollen are important for their life cycle. So that is a hard word to say. Some statistics. So 80% of our flowering plants and our crops that we need, bees will pollinate those and other pollinators as well. Those in the parentheses is the name of the company that I got the stats from. If you guys want to go and read about that, there are a lot of really cool scientific stats and things that I was even surprised by. A single bee, this is referring to honeybees specifically, can reach around 5,000 blooms in her lifetime. I'm going to do a calculation here real quick, and this will hopefully blow your mind. Let's see if I can find my calculator. So let's see. A single bee can pollinate 5,000 blooms in her lifetime. A fully sized beehive might have 20,000 bees in them, right? So let's see. That number is basically a lot of zeros. 100 million. So that's a lot of flowers. That's more than a lot of us have on our farms, right? Even if you count plants where they have multiple blooms altogether. And so that just shows you the impact that just honeybees have by themselves, not to mention all the other bees, not to mention all the other pollinators as well. So in regarding bee gardening, we talked about some of the plants that these specific bees prefer as their food source. Bee gardening will help us conserve, and so we create what's called way stations. Usually it's butterfly way stations, but butterfly way stations serve the same purpose for bees as well. The goal is to create areas that are safe and watched over and protected by humans, and preferably the government, and protected, that where people can't deforestate or do urbanization. These are areas that are strictly wild and they're not to be touched. And sometimes they're gardens as well. And so when we create gardens at schools and other things, that's the purpose that we're doing here. Is to help people grow their own food, but also to create areas where pollinators are safe. The other thing is to add resources that they need. So the fragrant bloom clusters for bees specifically, because bees rely heavily on their scent, whereas hummingbirds and some other animals don't have a good sense of smell. So the plants that you plant, a lot of times you'll be able to smell the nectar and the pollen as well. And if you can smell it, then that's a good sign that the bees can absolutely smell it. And that's how part of how they'll navigate to their food source. Making sure that we're incorporating cool colors. So blue, purple, and white being specifically blue and purple being more so the favorite color for bees. They like yellow as well, but I've noticed blue and purple are the ones they gravitate towards the most. And adding water. Water is important. So they do drink, as I said, they do drink a lot of nectar, but they still do need water, and they do feed water to their young as well. And so what people do is they either use a bird bath, or they do the more successful thing is they actually will take a hose and just muddy an area. And this is good because butterflies enjoy this, and bees do as well, and beetles and other pollinators.
So if I throw those little discs in my little pond for killing mosquitoes, will it kill the bees also?
Yes, so a lot of pesticides, even though it only says this is the specific pest it kills, because insects have very similar action sites and genetics, a lot of times it will impact other insects as well. And it can impact humans because we do have shared DNA with insects, which is very surprising and interesting, but because of that, it can impact us as well, and other animals too, yes.
I'm just going to comment on Sharon. If it's the mosquito bites, bits, or whatever they're called,
discs.
they're completely safe to everything. What it is they're soaked with an oil, and it's a safe oil, but it makes a scum over the top, so the mosquitoes die underneath. They need oxygen and they can't get out. So they're safe to birds, toads,
That's work.
all of those.
That would work, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I use at my apartment is, and I forgot the name of it, but it's a plug-in and it has a blue light. That's really good for attracting flies. I had my doubts because I paid like $30 for that. It's very expensive. And I plugged it in. I'm like, I hope this works. And I am surprised about how many gnats that were covered that, because gnats are the main things that we were dealing with. But mosquitoes and other flies will be attracted to that as well. It's the blue light that attracts them.
So it stays with the blue light away from you?
Yes, so if you were to plug it in here, they're really good at seeing the blue light. Blue light, it's like an ultraviolet type thing. You know, ultraviolet attracts insects by like a pretty good measure. So that's a good way to get rid of mosquitoes and other flies as well, biting flies and such too.
Very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, the water thing, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So the water thing, the thing with the water is that while they like mud, they also like sweat. And so sweat bees and wasps and butterflies will also drink human sweat as well, and Gatorade. That's another thing I found out. So adding Gatorade might be a good thing to do. And then of course blooming trees. We talked a little bit about some of the blooming trees, but blooming trees are great for shelter. And if you want wild birds, that's a great way to do that. I would also add in here berries and other fruits, whether they're edible to humans or not, are a great way to not only have shelter, but also attract some other pollinators as well. And bees, because bees love those, like holly and other things like that. That's one of the, whenever I see holly, I always see honeybees and other bees there enjoying that as well. All right, and now I shall field, I know I did already, but now I shall field some questions. I'll go over here for that.
Nathan, I have a question about the bee. I know it has nothing to do with the bees, but you were saying you purchased something and you plugged it into the wall?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it kill?
So the way it works is it is so you keep whenever it's done, you keep the plug in. It's like a night light, but inside of the night light, when you look on the back, is this really sticky glue stuff. It's basically a sticky trap. So anything that lands on that, now I can pull my hand out when I touched it by accident, but a small fly that doesn't have as much momentum, they're gonna see the blue light and go and investigate it. It's the same way like moths like lamps. It's the same kind of thing. And so they'll be attracted to the ultraviolet light and they'll stick to it, and then you just remove the sticky part, throw it away, and then add a new sticky one in, and it just slides right in, and you can keep it in. Yes?
We saw it was about this big, and it was almost cobalt blue
Uh-huh.
bee, and we've never seen anything like
Yes,
that.
so there are a couple of bees. There's the blue orchard bee, that's blue. I would have to get a look at it to see. And there's also the cuckoo bee. I didn't talk about cuckoo bees because they're a pest. It's weird that there's a bee that's a pest. They are metallic and they have pits all over their body. They can be blue and green and yellow and all sorts of colors. So when you look at them, it has a shimmering effect, and they're very beautiful. But if you know about cuckoo birds, they infest other hives, and then they kill the eggs, and then they force the other bees to raise their own eggs and stuff. More so the solitary bees will do that. So yeah, cuckoo bees are a pest to other bees. But yeah, that may be what you saw, yes.
Years ago, we had a hay barn, and there was some hay in there, and my brother must have disturbed the nest or whatever, and bees started coming out, and they started attacking him, and I think they were carpenter bees, because I think they were the bigger ones, and my dad was trying to keep the bees away from him, but they wouldn't sting my dad, they would just keep going to my brother. So you made a comment earlier that they tend to go back at the same. Do bees tend to do that?
Yeah, so a lot of insects do that because we have a different smell. So for example, when I was in Belize with my dad, the mosquitoes ignored him and only came after me. It was very personal. It felt personal. I was like, what? Did I not like refund you on your taxes or something? I'm like, what? What did I do? But we smell differently. So the interesting thing is this: when you get stung by a bee, not only do they know our smell or the smell of what has attacked them, and of course the visuals as well, but also when a single bee or an ant or a wasp or any of the hymenopterans sting you, they release a pheromone on you that says, this is the target, get this guy. And so they won't get the other people that are with you, but they'll get the person that's been stung, unless multiple people have been stung, in which case. For example, we had one of my coworkers, we went to a honeybee hive at our place, at our campus, and she was wearing perfume and had a very floral outfit on, and the bees were there and around her, and I was just kind of chill. I was in white, like all white. We didn't have our protection on, our bee suits, but she got stung. And then she started running, and I think some other bees were following her, but we were perfectly fine. And it's because of that. It's because of we smell differently to the bees, but also because they release that pheromone. Yeah.
Why is it some people can work with bees and not cover them, and others can't even get close?
Yeah, so the reason for that is this, and this is another thing my parents won't believe me about, but I know I'm right. When you work with bees, what usually happens is if you're a new beekeeper, you have your bee suit on, you work with bees, and similarly to what we talked about with when bees leave a hive and they have a different scent, well, you essentially take on, I believe this is true, you essentially take on to some degree the scent of the hive because they're around you and you're working with them, and so they basically see you as a part of the hive, so where they can trust you, which is why some people cannot wear protection and just never get stung, and then someone can just like look at the bees and then they get stung. Maybe not to that exaggeration, but certainly that's why
No, that's true.
different people.
My son and Rick would go and mess with the bees, and I stand 50 feet away with my little camcorder. The bee would come over and get me, and they're just
Yeah.
like, they're
Yeah.
right there. But they targeted me.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
You're it.
I'm it. I'm it.
Yeah, they're smarter than we give them credit for, but yeah, that's why. Any other questions?
I have a general question.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I didn't pay attention to the article I saw online too closely, but the headline was that the crisis about bee populations is apparently not as severe as it was discussed a couple of years ago. And it made me wonder, I said, well, that's good news if true, and then I went on. Yeah, is it still a crisis about bee populations in general declining in North America?
So it is a crisis, but not for the same reason. I haven't heard anything about colony collapse disorder, but now the crisis is, and we're actually facing this in Cyprus, is the constant and increased urbanization and deforestation. So I don't know if any of you have been to Cyprus or know what it looks like, but 290, the main road that goes through Cyprus, once you get into into the main part of the new part of Cyprus, on your right, there's this massive, beautiful forest. It is all gone. Like, I was surprised when I saw it because I was like, why am I able to see like all the way to the other side of like where the neighborhoods are and like the side road and everything? I used to never be able to see that. And then I noticed that the tractors were out there and they were doing stuff. So they're getting rid of massive areas of wildland. Now, where my parents live in the woodlands, they don't do that. They actually build around the trees and stuff, which is what we should be doing. And so that is the main issue, is that the monarch butterfly and some of the bee populations are continuing to decline. I think it's been curbed by more people being educated about it, and with Texas A&M and Prairie View and all these other organizations now kind of realizing, okay, we need to fix this somehow, and we only fix this by producing new areas. What I have noticed also along 290, which is a good thing, and I'm very happy about this, is that on the freeway itself, because you know how some freeways have the road and that just doesn't drop off, but it's like a slope with some dirt and grass and stuff. Well, now they've started along 290 all the way through where Prairie View is, from Prairie View up to Cyprus. They now have trees that are now being planted there, along with some flowering plants and other things. So I am seeing that more now, where they're adding more biomes and stuff to public areas. I'm seeing that more. So hopefully that will be something that will increase the population once more. It's not irreversible. It's something we can improve. So I do have a story that I wasn't going to tell you this because I didn't think of it till just now, but it's a very interesting story about bees. And you won't think it's about bees until I get towards the end. So the story is this, and I don't know the name or the place where this happened, but it is 100% a true story. The story is this. There was this lady who, she had gotten married and she had kids and everything was going well. Well, one day she wasn't feeling well and she started having rashes and some other symptoms, and she went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, yeah, you got Lyme disease, because apparently there's some ticks with her dog or something like that. So she ended up getting Lyme disease. Well, thinking it was like us, Lyme disease, everybody gets that, or whatever. She just continued about things as normal until she started being able to not get out of bed. She was in chronic pain. It was just very miserable. Her husband and her kids, or her husband took her kids and left her. So she ended up having to have a caretaker who came and would live with her. And like, if they were going to go somewhere, she tried different treatments. And so this caretaker would be the person to make sure that she got home safely and all of that. So she basically had to live with someone, a live-in caretaker, to take care of her. And so the story starts where, after they explain that stuff, where she's in a state where she's super depressed and she's kind of like, I can't live like this anymore. I want to just, go into the beyond or wherever, right? And I was like, well, that's really sad. Like, I can't imagine like living like that. And so she decided, she had actually moved to a new town with her caretaker. And so she told her caretaker, I have a feeling I'm going to die any day. I would like to take a walk in the town square, and you know it's nice and sunny out, and there's a rainbow and other stuff going on, and I just want to take one last walk and see the new town that I'm in before I go. And so she was walking in this new town, and a bee came near her face, and she was like, eh, and she swatted away, not knowing that it was an Africanized killer bee and that there was a swarm in the town. And so the swarm, like, you know how Africanized killer bees are, really descended on her and were just like stinging her mercilessly. The caretaker ran inside, and then, you know, after the bees moved on and she was there, and she's now not only in pain from Lyme disease, but now in pain from all of these stings, because you guys know that killer bees can kill you because of the amount, it's not the venom, but it's the amount of venom that's constantly being pumped into your body. So she said, the caretaker said, I have to get you to the hospital or else you're gonna die. And she goes, no, I want to die. I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't care if it's painful or not. Just get me home, I will lie in bed, and I will die. Now this is the part where things are like, this seems like a miracle, in my opinion. It seems like a miracle. She gets home and she goes to sleep. She passes out and goes to sleep. She wakes up, and not only has she not died from the killer bee, she was allergic, by the way. She was allergic to bee stings. She has not died. They cured her Lyme disease. So they found out, oh, hey, bee venom cures Lyme disease, but we can't stick bees on people who have Lyme disease because, you know, it's not ethical. So now it's like a treatment, like an antivenom type thing where you can use bee venom to actually cure Lyme disease.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've also heard that's good for arthritis.
I have heard that too, yeah. It's interesting how many things that we don't like bee venom and snake venom, are actually helpful for stuff. Not that I would suggest, you know, your daily bee venom shake or anything like that. You know, that might be not healthy, but it is interesting.
Yeah, I've got a cousin, he's a beekeeper, or used to be, and he says that arthritis is pretty prevalent in his family, but he said he doesn't have arthritis. He's been done multiple times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you guys very much.